Why, hello again to all my friends, family Furbies, and to the ever-lovely Fatalis fandom. I am back yet again with answers to your long-burning questions about my beloved characters. So enough with the fanfare, let us get into the questions. Question 1. What is Aspen's psychology? Why does she hate everyone, even Thatcher, although Thatcher is like a walking teddy bear? Aspen is an oddity, I must admit. In all honesty, there's no real reason for Aspen's hatred of anyone that isn't the gay policeman. If I had to take a guess, I'd say it's because Aspen is a stray, and her first relationship to a living thing was Harkin, thus she bonded with him, and he doesn't spend much time away from her, so she perceives anyone that takes up his time as a threat. She sort of sees Thatcher, Olsen, and anything else Harkin has to do, like his job, as competition for his love. Question 2. Did the main cast have any weird habits? For example, maybe Olsen can't leave home without a pocket mirror. Weird example, but it was the best I could come up with. Yes, they do. I'd say the character with the most weird habits is Viv, because Viv is very particular with how she lives her life. For example, Viv needs to carry ribbons with her at all times. Not only does she wear ribbons in her hair regularly, but she also wears them on her dresses, as ascots around her neck, or even just on her accessories like handbags. But that's just one example. Viv also has to carry at least one treat with her at all times, be it a lollipop, a small bag of cookies, etc. I'm gonna speed run these, but some other examples include Olsen, who needs a pack of gum with him at all times, keeps his mother's engagement ring in his wallet at all times, and he needs to water all and any plants he passes by. He gets it from his sister. He also has this habit of talking out of the side of his mouth a lot. It comes as a result of having gum or lollipops towards one side of his mouth when speaking. Harkin is honestly pretty normal, but he always has to have a book to read on him. He also has this issue where he always brings his jacket out with him. On the rare chance he goes outside, even if it's in the middle of summer, he brings out and wears his jacket because of the fact Harkin is nearly always cold, and for no particular reason. He also needs to stop to get pomegranate juice from a local store basically every time he goes outside. Jive nearly always carries a magnifying glass with her. She also has this involuntary hand twitch as a result of having to write 250 flashcards a day for her college courses. Raven is, well, me, and I have wicked GAD, so I have plenty of odd habits. But the character of Raven doesn't have GAD, so she doesn't have as weird of habits. Raven always has a switchblade on her, steps over the cracks in the street, and needs the lights outside of her bedroom to be on all night. Question 3. Just how big is the mansion Viv lives in? Is it almost as big as a castle? Not exactly, though I do think that would be really cool. Viv's house, i.e. Pearl Manor, is roughly the same size as the Winchester Mansion in California. To put that into perspective, that means Viv's house is around 24,000 square feet. Not quite as big as a castle, though it is huge, and lots of the architecture in her manor, more specifically the spiral staircases and spires, are very akin to that of castle architecture. Question 4. Question that also sort of relates to the previous one. Do the Pearls have more estates? Just how rich is Vivica? That they do! After her house was burned to the ground, Viv and her mother had to move, so a new smaller version of the Pearl Manor was constructed, which is where her mother still lives. Viv specifically asked for her former home, the one that was burned, to be rebuilt for her to live in as an adult, and her wish was granted, so they already have 2 estates, albeit ones to live in. But Viv's mother, Anastasia, if you forgot, is also a famed seamstress and the owner of Pearl Chic, where she sells her designs and clothes. Her mother has at least 60 stores, a few of which are in Delphine, and Viv has some shares in the business herself. Not too much, really, and that might come as kind of a shock, but Viv can also design clothes and has made designs of her own to sell there, so she also earns a profit from those stores, which count as other estates. Safe to say that Viv is very rich. Question 5. What is Anastasia Pearl's backstory? Please explain the scar, maybe how she met Viv's dad, and what exactly happened to him. Anastasia Pearl is a very interesting subject. Anastasia Pearl, formerly Anastasia Waverly, is actually originally not from Delphine. She moved there in her early 20s, about the age Viv is now, just to see the city, and there met and fell in love with Elliot Lee Pearl, whose family had lived in Delphine for decades. They eventually married around 1920, I'd say, and had a daughter together, who you already know as Vivica Ann Pearl. Unfortunately, Elliot died around the time Viv was about 7 years old, leaving Anastasia a widow. I'll be making an entire video on Viv and this event in particular in the future, but what basically happened is that Elliot was murdered by a criminal he was chasing down in a famous shootout. That same criminal, before being promptly arrested, also enlisted those that worked for him to set fire to the Pearl Manor, and poor Anastasia was not quick enough to escape before getting burned on the right side of her face. Question 6. What kind of dynamic do the Wickers siblings have? Is one of them the protective one? Does one of them always get in trouble? Lastly, who's the favorite Wickers kid? Honestly, if you were to meet the Wickers in real life, you could just tell they were all related. They're all so strikingly similar. The Wickers siblings are adorable. They're a very tight-knit family, and it shows in how much they care about each other. For anyone who doesn't know, Olsen has 4 siblings: his eldest sister Noelle, his older sister Elisa, his younger brother Darren, and his baby sister Elena. If I had to say who's the most protective of the 5, it'd probably be Noelle or Elisa. Comes with being the oldest, I guess. Though they're protective in different ways, I'd say. Noelle is protective in the sense that she watches out for her siblings and their relationships and lives, whereas Elisa is more protective when it comes to injuries or life-threatening scenarios. Unshockingly, the one that usually finds himself in trouble is Olsen, and that's usually not a negative thing either. Olsen just tends to attract weird people into his life, kind of like a magnet, but he's plenty clever and cunning enough to get out of it. In terms of who the favorite was, Louisa, Olsen's mom, swears up and down that she loves all her kids equally, but her favorite's always been Olsen. They're a very sweet little family, even if there is some favoritism at play. Question 7. How different was the first draft of Fatalis? I know Harkin didn't exist, but I also remember you mentioning something about Vivica being a lot more bitchy, and she physically abuses Olsen. Does this still happen in the current version of Fatalis, or was it completely scrapped? Oh boy, the first draft of Fatalis. See, Fatalis has been through a lot of incarnations, but the first real draft of the story was vastly different. Of course, Harkin didn't exist, and yes, Viv was a lot more cruel and sharp-tongued, even more than she is now. She outwardly threatened his family in the first draft, going so far as to threaten hanging his 7-year-old niece on the Tempire gates outside her house, or murdering him in cold blood without a second thought. Viv is still physically abusive towards Olsen in the current version, but it's definitely toned down. Before, she was beating him bloody, and nearly every day he'd come home with a new bandage or bruise. Jeff and Raven also changed a lot from the first draft to the current one. Before any real story was decided on, Jeff and Raven were actually meant to be reluctant to work with each other. They kind of despised the idea of working with another person, but had a similar sense of morality, that sense being 0, and slowly grew more attached to each other throughout the course of the story. Like, the two kept working together, lying through their teeth, and claiming they liked working together, when in all actuality they just wanted a murder partner, and that slowly blossomed into a real friendship. Of course, Raven also dies in this version via electric chair, and Olsen was far more morally bankrupt than you know him now. Lots of changes were made, too many to get into right now, that might deserve its own video, actually. Question 8. What are each of your characters' favorite books or movies, depending on their preference? Kind of a hard question to answer since my characters exist in the 1900s, which didn't have the modern stories and movies I'd expect they'd like, so I'm gonna cheat a bit, and I'm gonna name the modern day movies and books that I'd expect them to like. Jiv's favorite movie, hands down, is Wes Craven's Scream. She quotes it relentlessly to Raven and would die for Stu Matcher. Her favorite books likely come from the Grisha-verse, i.e. the Shadow and Bone trilogy and the Six of Crows duology. Very old-timey, very bloody, very funny. It's just her thing. Raven is, well, me, and I myself have no idea what my favorite movie is, though I'd probably have to say Knives Out or the Lego Movie. The Raven is also a horror nerd, much like Jive, and is a fan of John Carpenter's Halloween, Scream, Orphan, The Conjuring, Us, etc. Her favorite book is Jeanette Walls' The Glass Castle, and her favorite book series is Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. Olsen's favorite movie is probably Back to the Future, and he's a big fan of musicals as a former theater kid himself, so I can probably see him watching a bunch of Disney musicals religiously. He'd also probably be a big Edgar Wright fan, stuff like Scott Pilgrim or Baby Driver. I think his favorite book would be Little Women because of wholesomeness. I imagine Viv might have trouble liking anything, seeing as she is, well, her, but if I had to take a guess, I'd say her favorite movies would be reminiscent of her old-timey life in the 1900s. Stuff like Chicago, Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber, Fleet Street, etc., etc. Her favorite book is probably extremely depressing, like Lord of the Flies or The Road. Harkin's favorite movies probably vary between extremely depressing or cute fun stuff he and Olsen cuddle up and watch together. His favorite movie might be Good Will Hunting or Dead Poets Society, or hell, even maybe The Nightmare Before Christmas. Harkin's also an English lit major, so I imagine he could never pick just one book to call his favorite, seeing as he's been reading since his eyes opened. Fun fact though, all of my characters love Titanic. Yes, all of them. It's the dark secret that binds their relationship. Ever wonder why all 5 of them were specifically chosen to be bound by fate in a never-ending loop of tragedy? Well, it's because they're all suckers for the boat crash movie. I'm sorry, it's just the truth. Question 9. Does the main cast ever have a snow day? Well, more specifically, do they have a Christmas episode? Well, if you're not counting the snow day that the cast has in Masquerade and Escape and don't want to count the snow that falls whilst my characters are maimed and irreversibly traumatized, then no, not really. The snow falling during the last few episodes is symbolic, so it's safe for that episode. Honestly, I'd love to get a Christmas special. No idea what I'd do for it, really, besides excessively reference National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, A Christmas Story, and the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Frosty the Snowman animated shorts. In all honesty, the Masquerade Massacre takes place during December. The story of Fatalis takes place over the course of 1 year, so in theory, the massacre either takes place before or after Christmas has passed, and by that logic, there could be a Christmas episode. Definitely an interesting idea to ponder over. Question 10. How do your characters relate to you? Most people base their OCs on aspects of themselves. Which character would you say relates to you the most? Of course, the obvious option is Raven, as she is me, but if we're going off the character that isn't me, then it's Harkin. There's a lot of similarities between Harkin and Raven, actually. It's part of the reason their characters and their arcs and heartbeats blend so well together. But the main thing connecting them, I think, is the mental state. See, in story, Raven doesn't have depression, but I actually do. I have clinical depression, as does Harkin, and our mannerisms are just really similar. Much like Harkin, I am also very awkward, can't communicate, have depression, feel beneath everybody, read a lot, and attempt to write down my emotions in a journal, even if I fail at that spectacularly. I'm also an English lit major, and Harkin has to inherit this from me because I am his omnipotent creator. Question 11. Who is the most queer-coded? I'd say it's Harkin, but it might actually be Raven. Harkin's sexuality, he's gay and demisexual for future reference, is integral to his character because he comes to terms with and realizes this. Raven, however, is just very trans-coded, even if it doesn't impact her character, even if it doesn't actually impact her. Raven's haircut is very masculine and short, even more so for the time period. She wears both suits and ties and dresses, and she even binds. She binds with gauze, bandages, and ribbons. In all actuality, I don't know why I added these specific traits to Raven. I myself wish I could look less feminine. I'd love to cut my hair like Luz No Seda, but I'm not trans, nor do I struggle greatly with my gender identity. I would and have considered wearing a binder, as I don't want a feminine body simply because it seems like a hassle, and I suppose I applied this same idea to Raven. Disclaimer, don't bind with gauze or bandages. It's extremely dangerous. Raven only does this because it's the 1900s and binders weren't commonplace back then. But Raven binding she's likely doing it for the same reasons I would want to bind, just because she doesn't want a feminine body. Not really a specific reason for it. Either that, or she just hates the feeling of bras and uses gauze as an alternative. Question 12. If there was ever a frickin' Rapunzel AU, who would be which character? Flynn Rider, the boyfriend blueprint himself, is actually a pretty big inspiration behind Olsen, and seeing as, Tangled is partially a love story, I'd say Rapunzel is Harkin, Olsen is Flynn, Viv is Mother Gothel, and Jive and Raven are probably some of those insane people from the Snuggly Duckling. More specifically, Jive is the unicorn guy, and Raven is the mime. Question 13. What AUs have you thought about? Like ones that have just come to mind? I think about a lot of AUs. I just think they're neat. Some AUs that just pop into my mind on occasion include the Owl House AU, the Amphibia AU, the Sweeney Todd AU, the Danger Days AU, the Black Parade AU, the Three Cheers AU, the Ring AU, the Scream AU, the Modern AU, the Stalker Harkin AU, the Nice Viv AU, the Villains in Love AU, the BuzzFeed Unsolved AU, the Tragedy AU, the Steven Universe AU, the Nightmare Before Christmas AU, the kill me, the Coraline AU, and the Corpse Bride AU. Yeah, I think about a lot of AUs. Question 14. Which AUs would you love to make? This doesn't mean you're obligated to, just curious. I'm most interested in making the Modern AU, Tragedy AU, Nightmare Before Christmas AU, and the Three Cheers AU. Mostly leaning towards the Modern AU, though, because it's just such a fun idea seeing my old-timey as all hell characters living in the year of our Lord and Savior 2022. Like, imagine these 1900s detectives and cops. These people have faced massacres and economic collapse, been hailed as heroes, gone down in a city's history, and then they can't open Twitter. I just think that'd be absolutely hilarious. Not to mention that my characters in this AU, at least, would not have aged. They would just be hopping through a time portal, essentially, and look like they're in their 20s, but would be talking as if they popped straight out of It's a Wonderful Life. Question 15. If Aspen had an epithet, what would it be? Well, if I'm being honest with you, I have never legitimately considered giving a cat an epithet, I must say, but I pride myself on giving my characters the most dramatic nicknames and epithets of possibly all time, so I'll go with the faint-hearted feline of Delphine. Question 16. How did you make that video, the one about what you imagined your Fatalis character sounded like? How did you find the lines? Did you know all the characters / voices / actors? I have synesthesia, which explains so much about me, so that might have also played a part in how I could just instantly assign a voice to a character. But in all reality, I kinda just used the voices of characters that inspired mine. Like, for example, Jive is very similar to Vi from Arcane, so I used Vi's VA, Haley Steinfeld, for Jive's voice. My thought process was basically that the characters that inspired my characters may be similar enough personality-wise, design-wise, whatever, to have a similar voice. I sort of chose the lines that I felt best exuded my characters' personalities. For example, I chose Josie Montana McCoy for voice acting Harkin, and the lines I used came from Kaya in Genshin Impact. The lines I chose were all related to things that were similar to Harkin, like describing himself as a knight or asking people if they need help. The lines just seemed to fit Harkin as well, you know? And no, I did not know all the voices that I chose. I didn't know who Kaya or his VA was at the time, and I also didn't know who Vi was, nor her VA. I may need to update Viv, Olsen, and possibly Raven and Elisa's voice headcanons as well. But, either way, voice headcanons are really, really fun to make. Highly recommend doing so. It's a great exercise for really getting to know your characters. Oh man, that took a lot of editing. I can't believe this video is finally done and over with. I'm so sorry that this is so late. I just, some art block issues and just a lot of school stuff. And, I was working on this video when finals came around the corner, but it's finally done and I'm back and I'm gonna make some more content. And, if you got to this far in the video, thank you so much, and thank you so much for waiting and dealing with all my Last of Us ranting and my community posts. My next video will be covering Vivica's childhood, and basically kind of like a quick little character analysis of her. I say quick as if it's not gonna still be like 8 minutes or something like that. But, thank you very much for watching. If you want to see any of the drawings in this video as maybe profile pictures or anything like that, then you can head to the Fatalis site, which I will have in the description. And thank you so much for watching, and thank you to everybody who asked me questions about my little story, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye!